Hey guys, so today we're going to look at ports and how they work with IP addresses to form sockets to allow information to pass through a firewall and into the correct application on a server or a client. So let's go ahead and go to the desktop and see what we can see. Okay, so here we are. We're looking at a diagram. On this side we have the client. This is your computer basically. We're going to be browsing the internet and are going to be accessing email. So you probably have a firewall, and on the inside, on your side of the firewall, you have a private IP address. This is the DHCP number that you get from your firewall or from your router, and it's a private IP address. That means it's not routable over the internet. This is a Class C address, and it's a Class C private address. So if you sent this out on the internet, no one would know what to do with it because it's not routable. So you probably also have a combo firewall / router. It has an external IP address on the outside, and that's the internet-facing side. And then it has an internal address as well, which is the same scheme as your computer's address, as your private address. So it's got a public and a private IP address. The private IP address is also your gateway, your router address, and it's of the same scheme that your private IP address on your computer is. Then on the internet-facing side, it has a public address that is routable over the internet. So the internet will recognize this IP address. DNS servers will recognize it as part of a probably, because it's also DHCP, you're probably getting this address unless you have a static IP built into your router or assigned to you from your internet service provider, which most people do not. But if you do, that's okay. Either way, it works the same. You're getting this IP address from your internet service provider. They have purchased a block of them. Some are available for DHCP. Some of them they can sell as static IPs. And inside of your router, you also have some kind of a firewall. Essentially what it does is it controls mainly incoming traffic. By default, outbound traffic, which means from you to the internet, is allowed without restriction. It's green lighted. There are no blocks unless you've set them up. There are no blocks on outbound traffic. That means traffic coming from your computer to the internet. Those packets are not blocked or regulated in any way. Those packets can leave as freely as it's possible to leave. So outbound traffic on your firewall is not blocked. Inbound traffic, on the other hand, is for a fact blocked. So inbound traffic, excuse me, is regulated based on whether it's coming in from somewhere it was solicited or whether it's coming in unsolicited, based on what port and IP address it's coming into, and based on what's called port forwarding that you may have set up in your firewall. So unless you've punched a hole in your firewall and allowed incoming traffic, it's not going to get in. Now, firewalls generally come, particularly the home brand of firewall that's built into a router. They generally come with some services preset. For example, HTTP, usually ports 80 and ports 443 are open because everybody needs those. Everybody wants to get to the internet. Usually things like port 21 for FTP, port 25 for the known services are allowed out by default. You can turn those off, or you can modify them, or you can add more. But for the most part, the known services that people use are allowed to come into the firewall. Because if not, well, then you wouldn't be accomplishing very much on the internet. Now, on the other side of this page here, we have a server. This is your web server / email server / FTP server / whatever services you use. The principle is the same. Essentially, it's a server behind its own firewall. Once again, from the server, outbound traffic is generally not blocked. It's allowed free access to leave. Inbound traffic, on the other hand, is regulated. Now, with a server, you almost have to have holes punched in the firewall, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to serve, because you have unsolicited traffic coming to the server constantly. If it's a web server, if it's serving web pages, then you're constantly having requests from clients coming in unsolicited to get content off the server. And so the firewall has to have holes punched in it. Also, these holes have ports assigned, like port 80, port 443 for secure web, port 80 for not secure web, although not many people use that anymore, port 25, port 910. All these numbers basically are tags that allow your server to know what service that the traffic is for. Now, your server has a public firewall, a public IP address on the outside of its firewall. It's set up just like your client is. Basically, you've got a public IP address that's publicly routable, and then on the inside, it's got some kind of private IP address, which we don't really care about. The private IP address of the server does us no good unless we're trying to hack into the server network. So essentially, this is all we care about: the public IP address of the server and the DNS records that it is assigned to. So if your web server here, if its IP address is 172.16.12.1, then there's going to be a DNS record somewhere that says, okay, webserver.com is assigned this IP address, and so when my client requests it, it's going to get this information, and it's going to send its information to this number. Like I said, there's also a private IP address on the other side of this firewall. We don't care about that, because that has nothing to do with us. We don't know, and we don't care. Essentially, what's going to happen is when the request comes in and it goes through the firewall into the firewall/router for this server, a thing that is called network translation is going to occur, or network address translation, I'm sorry. And what happens is the server router is going to look at the packets coming in, it's going to look at the port number, and it's going to say, all right, so this is web service traffic. It came in from the internet. Obviously, this traffic needs to go to the web server, and it needs to be sent through. It's okay to send it through. Even though it's unsolicited traffic, we're going to let it through because it has the right socket. It has the right IP address and the correct port number. So it's going to be allowed through. It's going to go to the web server, and then at that point, the web server will look at the packet, decode it. It'll say, all right, so you want the home page for our website. And then it will build packets containing that homepage data and send them back. Now, once again, outbound traffic is allowed, so it has no problem just sending it back. Now, that packet that it created, or those packets that it created, have the IP address, the external IP address, and a port number for your client. That's the way that the server knows who to send this back to. That's also the way that your firewall/router knows what to do with that packet when it gets it. Now, the difference being, when the packets are coming back here, they are solicited packets. Your router remembers that you made a request to this server, and that you sent that request to a certain IP address and a certain port, and now it's getting packets back from that IP address, and they have the correct port number that your computer uses. Now, the port number that your computer uses is going to be different from the port that the server uses. Web servers use port 80 or port 443. Email servers use port 25, or basically whatever ports they use, they're specified. Your computer will assign itself a port, usually from way high up in the ports, in the port numbers, up in the 50,000 range, 40,000 range, somewhere up in there. That is a temporary port, and essentially what happens is the traffic comes back with that port number. Your client goes, hey, okay, I was supposed to let that through. It was solicited. It's supposed to go to that port. So it sends it through to that IP address. It allows it to come through the firewall to that IP address and that port number. Now, your computer, your desktop or laptop that you're working on, looks at the packet that it gets from the router and says, yeah, I requested that. It's got the right port number on it, which means this virtual port that I invented, it's on there, so that means it needs to go to my web browser. And when that happens, then the packets are decoded, the frames are decoded, all the way through the OSI model layers until the data is finally given to the web browser and it shows up on your screen. So that's essentially how traffic flows, and that's how port numbers are used. So let's look at another kind of example. We're going to add some stuff in here. Okay, so first of all, okay, number one thing happens is a request is made. And essentially what that means is you open up your web browser or you open up your email client and you say, I want to go to Microsoft.com. So you send that, you click the enter button on your keyboard, or whatever it is that you do, and your web browser sends this information down through the OSI model until it gets to the first level. By that time, it's been encoded into packets and into frames, and now it's network traffic that can go outbound. So as we said a while ago, outbound traffic is allowed by default. So the request leaves your PC and goes through the firewall. I wish there was a smaller font for that. There we go. Okay, whoops. That may be too small. Guys, if you can't read that, let me know. I'll make that a little bit bigger. There we go. All right, so a request is made. That's you deciding, hey, I need to go see a page on Microsoft.com or whatever it is you see. Outbound traffic is allowed by default, so the request leaves your PC and goes to your router. It gets, I guess the next thing would be the IP address is changed from your private to the router's public IP, and the message is sent. Okay, so essentially what's happened here, your computer has sent a message. It's gone into the router. Now, it came from 192.168.1.10, which is a private internal address. That won't work on the internet. So your router changes that IP address to the public IP that it has. All traffic from your network comes from one IP address, whether it's your computer, your wife's computer, your mom's computer, your brother's computer, your phone, whatever. On the outside of your firewall, everything sees your network traffic using the public IP address of your router. So essentially what happens is the traffic leaves your computer, goes into the router, the IP address is changed through network address translation into the public IP address from your router, and all the basically all the traffic coming through your router out into the internet is seen as having this IP address. Just like on the other side of the coin, when traffic comes back, your router will retranslate, I guess you'd say. It will decode this public IP address and change it back to the private IP. It remembers where the traffic came from, and it will decode that and send it back to the private IP address through network area translation. Basically, that's how the information gets back to you. If you have multiple clients on this side of the firewall, that's how it knows which one to go back to. Is it retranslates that information, it resets it to the private IP address that it came from. So your router keeps up with that. And so essentially what you've got is you've got the IP address is changed, and now the traffic is moving out. So we've got, first of all, unsolicited traffic coming out here. That's more like it. And going through the firewall here. Unsolicited traffic entering firewall through a port. All right, so we've got unsolicited traffic entering the firewall through a port. The router inside of the server's network will decode the packets, and it will forward them to the correct application, whether it's web server, mail server, FTP server, whatever. It uses the port number to tell it what service to send it to. So, for example, if this is going through port 443, then the firewall says, okay, 443 is open because it is the port that secured HTTP traffic comes through. So it allows that in, and it transfers it from the router inside the server's network to the server, and then to the web server specifically. Using that port number as we go through the OSI models, the server operating system knows that it needs to send that traffic to the web server application. And I believe that's level 4, the application level, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's at some point on the right level, this traffic coming in gets sent to the proper application, and it's based on port number. That's the thing you need to get. If all this convoluted and confusing stuff doesn't make sense, what you need to get is the port number is what allows the server operating system to decide which application the traffic goes to. Now, once that's happening, remember this is unsolicited traffic. So we've decided we want to see the home page of our web page. And we've sent a request to this server. And now the server crafts a response. And basically it sends it back. It sends the information that we need back. Now, there are a couple of different things here. This is solicited traffic. Okay, so the information comes back in the form of solicited traffic. That means that the router/firewall knew it was coming. It was expecting it because it had just sent a request for this information earlier, and now it's getting a response, and based on the IP address and the port number that it has from when it got the initial request, it got along with a IP address, it got a virtual port number. Remember we talked about your PC picks a number way up high in the ports that no one else is using right now. Well, it uses that so that your firewall, your internal router/firewall, will know where to send this solicited response back to. And so now your router says, okay, I was expecting this message. It needs to go back to 192.168.10, so it takes off the external address, puts the internal address back on, along with the port number that your PC picked when it started this interchange. And now it's sending that information to your PC. And at that point, your computer runs the packets through the OSI model until it gets them all decoded. It puts the pictures and the text and whatnot on your browser screen, and you've successfully made a web request. Okay, guys, hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but that is essentially how port and IP addresses work together to allow information to travel from client to server and back. If that was too confusing, get with me after class and we'll go through it together, and I'll see if I can't simplify that a little bit for you. In the meantime, that is something that you need to know about, because that will be on the test, and that will also be on the certification test. So you need to have a good understanding of how traffic moves between client and server using both public and private IP addresses and port numbers. How it gets through the firewalls, how firewalls have to be configured. What we say poking a hole in the firewall means basically that we're allowing some kind of inbound traffic through a certain port. There are ports for games, there are ports for web traffic, for FTP traffic, for DHCP traffic, for every kind of traffic that you can think of. There's a port for that, and the routers expect traffic of those requests to come in on those ports. And so if you're expecting web page traffic, or if you're requesting a web page traffic, then you need to make sure that you're sending your request on port 80 or 8080 or 433 if it's secured or whatever, but it needs to be a recognized port. And then when the firewall on the server's network gets it, it will allow it through. If you send a malformed packet with the wrong port number, then the firewall will not allow your information through, and it will not allow a response. So essentially what will happen is, if you send a request with a port number that the web server or the firewall on the server side does not identify, it'll say, well, sorry, we don't have an application that corresponds with that port, so we're just going to discard these packets, and we're not ever going to send you a message as to why. So make sure that you have your firewall set to go the right way. Most firewalls, especially commercial, or not commercial, but residential firewalls, the kind that come with a Cisco router or whatever kind of router you have, most of those are going to be set by default to allow in all the inbound services that you need. FTP, file transfer, HTTP, email, any of those things, that firewall is going to be set up. It will give you an opportunity probably to make your own rules up in case you have like you want to run a Minecraft server or something. There are certain ports you have to open. If you want to allow your computer to be exposed to the internet so that you can use a remote desktop from work to connect to your home computer, 3389 is the port number you have to have open. Don't do that, by the way. Use an application. Use one of those web-based applications, because if you just open up port 3389 on your computer, on your router at home, 10 minutes later, your router won't belong to you. Somebody will have broken in there and changed the password, and you won't be able to control it. You'll have to give it a factory reset in order to get it back. So don't just open up port 3389 unless you know what you're doing. That's hopefully what this class will be preparing you for, is to be able to do things like that safely. Anyway, hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, I can be reached through the Canvas inbox or talk to me in class. Don't forget, we have class Monday. That's Monday, February 5th. And I will see you there. Have a good day.